This is Monday, November 11th, 2019. The Singerly listening station is at 2 Mary Court, Warwick, Maryland, talking to Frank Muller. Frank is the retired Director of Emergency Services for Cecil County and was a longtime volunteer. Frank, thanks for joining us today in this interview.
Good morning.
Frank, would you tell us what got you interested in joining the volunteer fire service and how your early years went with Singerly?
I had an interest in the fire company because of neighbors that were members. I lived down the street from Walter Lee all my childhood until I was 18. And I was younger. I was in the model trains and all, and the only place in Elkton you could really go to look at anything was Claude Cornett, Zeke. And he was a very active member of the fire company on the ambulance side. And in high school, 10th grade, and you're about to turn 16, and several of us that I was in school with all had an interest in the fire company, so we waited, we were 16 to join. And there was about 4 or 5 of us. Sam Goldwater, Ernie Knoll, Danny Jones. We were all in the same grade. We all went to school together, worked together at the same place. And a good friend of mine, Russ Strickland, was already in the fire company and very active. But he was a year older than me. And I guess maybe it's because of my peers and found how you went through the process of joining a fire company. And it wasn't an absolute thing. You made application, your application went through the board of directors who used a box of marbles, and you knew up front if you got 3 black marbles, you couldn't get in. So, it was like you respected that process because that made a difference whether you were going to get in or not. But I got in when I was 16 in 1971, and not knowing that I'd make a career out of it. I had an interest in fire and ambulance. We referred to it as EMS back in those days. But it was exciting for a young teenager. And but we learned back in the 70s that you had to balance your time with the fire company and actually working. All of us wanted a car, and you bought your own car and paid for the gas, and that got you to the firehouse for those of us who lived a distance from the firehouse. And I always thought I lived quite a ways away. But there was other members that were active, but also lived a distance away, even though we had a lot of members in town. It was the best times of my life, I think, the 60s and 70s. And you developed, as I look back now, I developed a lot of friendships through the fire and EMS service. Across the state, across the country. I mean, I've trained with people from as far away as Hawaii, and we stay in touch. I've got one friend now that I worked with who was in Australia, and I talk to him quite frequently, thanks to the internet. And we stay in touch, and he comes back to the States every other year, and we try to meet up, talk about how things were back in the 70s. And how much they've changed today. And that was about it. I mean, and I was able to get in. I didn't get 3 black balls, thank goodness. 'Cause that's embarrassing. And then you wonder why, and you'll never know why. It was secrecy. I mean, as a stockholding company, the stockholders once a year vote the board of directors in to run the business of the company, which includes members and membership. So you didn't know, and
when did you say you joined? Do you remember the dates, both as probationary and?
I want to say it was September of '71 because I turned 16 in May, and I was working at the time, and talking to my high school friends, because we graduated in '73, so I was in the end of 10th grade, and I applied, and they acted on it fairly soon afterwards. So it was September of '71, I'm sure, because
I think it was because I think I saw it in the minute book.
because I finished fireman's basic in the winter at Chesapeake City. Matter of fact, the whole bunch of us did, along with other people from across the county, but it was upstairs at Station 2. And we finished in the winter because I remember the bad weather and all, and my card from the Fire Extension Service in the University of Maryland was dated '72. So in order to get in that class, you had to be a member prior, and I think it started like October or November.
That was December '72, your card's dated?
And that was just early, like January, February it was.
Okay.
And at one time I had those cards, but it's hard to tell where they've gone.
Well, let's see, you got one there?
Nah, I've got the EMT, CRT paramedic cards, but
All right.
I don't know where my fireman's basic is. It might be in one of those books.
You mentioned getting blackballed.
Yes.
So you mentioned the membership process and the difficulty of going up before the board and the standards they set, and that if you got 3 blackballs, you were out the door.
Yes.
You had no
Couldn't get
trouble?
in.
You had no trouble with your probation?
No, not that I'm aware. I received enough white balls to get in on probation. So that was a big step because I had heard of other people that got 3 or more black balls. They didn't get in the first time. And a number of them applied a second or third time. They finally got in. Because it was a secret vote. And you didn't know who dropped the black ball or why. They may have just done it because, well, we're going to drop a black ball just to drop a black ball. So that was interesting to think about how that went back in those days. No interview or anything. You would apply and maybe talk to the chief, because Jack Cook was the chief when I got in. And, you know, you remember all these people prior to you getting into the fire company, like seeing Spec Slaughter. And you admired these people. And Spec was the chief when the airline crashed in '63, and we had just moved into the house that Pop built on Millennium Road, so we had a clear view of what was going on. And then it was all over TV, and I do remember that. And Spec was on TV quite a bit. Jack Cook, who's still living, and I believe Jack and Rodney Founds are the only 2 chiefs from the 60s, 70s, or 80s still alive, I believe, if I think about it. Jack Cook and Rodney Founds.
Yeah.
Because we've lost John Turnbull and obviously Spec Slaughter a number of years ago. I always admired him, even when he came around, because he wasn't chief anymore. And the same with Jack Cook. He was a very active chief, ran a very successful business. So you have to admire these people who were able to balance the fire company, which required quite a bit of time, and be able to work and successfully run a business, much less work for someone else. But back in those days, a lot of employers would allow a fireman to leave the job. Across the street, we had Jack Fears, who was president for a number of years. Him and his father had a gas station, Exxon station, across from Station 3 pretty much. So whoever was working for him would drop everything and run. And as soon as you got in, it was a welcoming environment put on by the existing members, and it made things much easier. And you would take a company level basic, which in retrospect was very few hours, and then you were allowed to ride the ambulance, as well as a fire truck. And I was riding the back step, it seemed like, in weeks, getting on an ambulance probably within a week of becoming a member or probationary member. And that was exciting. I mean, back then we had Coach ambulances, which no one in today's generation in the fire service and even knows what we're referring to probably, but that was the pretty much the station wagon, hearse type chassis. And we had a Pontiac and an Oldsmobile when I got in. Mm-hmm. The Pontiac was made by Superior, and the Oldsmobile was made by Miller Meter. And they were sold in Smyrna as well as out in Timonium. And then we had a GMC, I want to say a carry-all. It might not have been the model, but it was a GMC type truck, which was 392, and you saw it on the road a lot before I was getting the fire company. You know, you remember what you saw on the road. The Oldsmobile was reserved for inter-hospital transports because we did quite a bit of those back in those days. Serious patients were taken from the emergency room at Union, which was only an accident room back then, before they started the emergency room concept of having a doctor, full-time doctors on staff and nurses assigned to the emergency room. We'd take patients to the Delaware Division, which is now Wilmington Hospital. We made many of those trips up 95. Many.
So tell us about, so you joined. Do you remember your first call, your first, a little more, you mentioned training, your first training, what service you're gravitating toward? At the point you joined, Frank, are we specialized in that you were fire or ambulance, or is it everything?
We did both. Fire and ambulance. Back then, you joined the fire company, you pretty much did everything. Yeah. And what's interesting about looking today compared to back then, you know, Station 13 had just recently opened. That was the second station. And it had, you know, with the new station and a big hall, there was quite a few events there. And the company, the fire company, put on a monthly dance, which drew a lot of people. And on Sunday mornings, the probationary members had to go to Station 13 and clean that hall up. And the same way with bingo, which was held on Wednesday nights and still is. It moved from Station 3 to the big hall, Station 13, and we'd have to clean that up the next evening, which would have been Thursday evening, so there was no training scheduled on Thursday evening. But ironically, the same people were cleaning up were probably working bingo Wednesday night because you were required to as a probationary member. And we knew we were on 2 years probation. When we joined, it was a 2-year probationary period, and then we'll take another vote when they become members and receive a stock certificate. Well, I remember Gene Meekins was chief 72 to 73. He was voted in 72 at our annual stockholders meeting in February. And Gene, or you know, everybody affectionately called him Goat, the nickname he had before I joined the fire company. But anyway, I was nominated to be Fireman of the Year through the Firemen's Association, along with nominations from every company in the county. Well, I won. And that was, to me, that was a very exciting time because I was the youngest of the nominations. But anyway, I won. I came up for a membership vote. Well, that was my senior year in high school. So my good friend Russell Strickland had found out that Ocean City, Maryland was hiring seasonal employees, ambulance drivers, what we referred to back in those days. Well, you know, I had finished my EMT in Maryland, one of the first classes, because prior to Maryland becoming the state becoming, adopting the emergency medical technician standard, many of us would go to Delaware State Fire School or one of their field classes to take the emergency care course in Delaware, which was equal to EMT by NHTSA, the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration. They recognized EMS. Well, Maryland had established or adopted the EMT program to be run through the state health department. And many of us in my generation will remember receiving your EMT certification through the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. And I may have that here. Yes, I do. The Maryland State Department of Health and Mental Hygiene.
Yeah, you can go. Who are you
The
looking,
date
Frank?
on there
Is it this one in the top left?
It's May of 1973, I believe, is when I received my EMT.
Okay.
Well, Russell had told me about this opportunity at Ocean City, so I applied and was hired. So on weekends, because I was still in high school, I would go to Ocean City and work weekends. Russell had already started because he was attending the University of Maryland, and he had already finished, pretty much finished his time there before the semester ended, but he would go on weekends as well. And after high school, I graduated on a Sunday afternoon, and I was scheduled to work my first shift in Ocean City that night. That started at 5 or 6 p.m. Well, as soon as I graduated, I packed and headed to Ocean City, not knowing I wasn't going to come home for a couple of years. Well, it was much different in Ocean City. Russell and I arrived as the only EMTs they had ever engaged with. So that was interesting.